Hello again. Everybody in Britain is familiar with the iconic myth of the Blitz during the Second World War. We've all seen the images of St Paul's Cathedral outlined against the smoke of the bombing, people sleeping in tube shelters, all that sort of thing. The interesting thing is that myth, the Blitz myth, conceals an appalling massacre because the British Army were actually shelling cities, the cities of Britain, during the bombing. And of the 60,000 or so people who died in the Blitz, probably more than half were actually killed by British artillery rather than German bombs. Perhaps I ought to explain a little. There was no real defence against the bomber, the German bombers as they came over. Some of us have probably heard Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin's expression, the bomber will always get through. You couldn't do anything at that time to stop bombers getting through. However, a government that can't protect its people looks very weak, so they had to be seen to be doing something. This is rather like the old politician's syllogism, really. Something must be done, this is something, therefore this must be done. What they actually did defies all belief. Here's a British warship at that time. It's actually the flagship of the Royal Navy, the King George V. You can see there are enormous guns mounted on the ship. They're 5¼ inch calibre and they fire shells weighing 80 pounds. Now, there's nothing more useful if you're fighting another warship than to be able to hurl 80-pound shells in that way at it. For one thing, warships are heavy, they're slow moving, big, they make very good targets. If you miss the target, it doesn't matter, it's just a hell of a splash in the ocean. So from that point of view, naval guns, the sorts of turrets you can see in the picture, are absolutely perfect. You'd think that nobody with any sense at all would ever think of firing a gun like that anywhere near their own cities, but you'd be quite wrong. The next picture shows you the top of Primrose Hill during the Second World War. You see what's been done here? One of those gigantic guns firing 80-pound shells has been taken off a warship and then plonked down on the top of a hill in central London. Now, if those shells miss the aeroplanes that they're aiming at, and of course they did, nearly all the time, you had to fire about 20,000 of those shells to have a realistic chance of shooting down one aeroplane. If you miss, those shells aren't going to make a big splash in the water. They're going to land right in the streets of the capital, in the middle of London, which of course is what happened during the Blitz. Even if by some mischance or some rare freak occurrence you should hit an aeroplane, that simply means a large aeroplane crashing down into a city. We know what that looks like from the 9/11 attacks in New York in 2001. All across London, the same thing was happening. Naval guns were being set up, fired at aeroplanes, which they almost invariably missed, and the shells then either exploded over London or, more likely, landed in the streets. Here's two more gun turrets from warships. The first is on Wanstead Flats in East London, and the second one is at Clapham Common in South London. As I say, it was officially estimated that it would take 20,000 artillery shells to bring down a single aeroplane, so they weren't very effective, of course. So night after night, thousands of shells, I mean in London at times they were firing 30,000 shells a night. Night after night they were fired up in the air and they came down on the cities, not just London, obviously Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham. Lots of cities had guns like this being fired over them. It was known to everybody in government and everybody in the army that these things weren't shooting down any aeroplanes and that they were likely to kill more British people than they were Germans. Why did they do it? Winston Churchill continued these massacres for years. And the answer is very simple. People wanted action. When the German bombs were falling, they felt that they'd been abandoned by the government. They thought that the government didn't care about them, was quite happy to see the East End bombed. Something had to be done. And when they heard those artillery shells being fired at the German aeroplanes, they used to say things like, oh, we're hitting back at Jerry, now he's getting some of his own back. By the time the Second World War ended, the myth of the Blitz was so firmly fixed in people's minds that nobody really wanted to tamper with it. They didn't want to see it trashed. Something like 30,000 British citizens had been killed by the artillery fired at their cities by their own army. But no one really wanted to think about that. Needless to say, I've written a book about this. If anyone living in London is interested in this subject, one of these artillery pieces is still in position in the original place where it was fired. If you want to visit Mudchute Farm on the Isle of Dogs, and it's on the Dockland Light Railway, you can actually see heavy artillery in position on an anti-aircraft site. It's very curious to visit this place and imagine firing these artillery pieces, the artillery shells, at the Docklands, which are nearby, and try and imagine what the effect would actually be.